I kicked my husband and his manipulative female friend out after he let her move into our house and decided he would sleep in the same room with her. I'm 28. My husband is 30. We've been married for 4 years. Before that, we dated for 3 years. Overall, our marriage was fine, except for one massive issue: his unhealthy closeness with his so-called best friend. His best friend, as he always called her, is a woman he's known since childhood. Let's call her Fiona. They grew up next door to each other. They went to the same kindergarten, the same elementary school, middle school, and high school. Later, they even attended the same college, just different majors. They were inseparable growing up, and I couldn't forget that because they reminded me of it every chance they got. The only time they weren't constantly together was when they started working. That's when I met my husband. One day, Fiona told me I was the third most important woman in his life. First was his mother, second was her, and only then came me. She said it like a joke, but I was sure that deep down, she truly believed it. To be honest, I always felt like she disliked me and saw me as competition. When my husband and I first started dating, he introduced me to her as his girlfriend, and I tried to be polite and friendly. Almost immediately, she started making comments about how much makeup I wore and said I didn't need to try so hard to impress her. And that became a pattern. She constantly made snide remarks about my appearance, my clothes, and my tastes. Sometimes they were disguised as compliments, but they always left me feeling insecure. Once she openly said that my husband had a thing for dumb blondes, and I'm blonde. I think you can already imagine what kind of person she is. I tried several times to talk to my husband about this, even before we got married. I told him I had a bad feeling about Fiona, but he always brushed it off, saying I'd get used to her eventually, that she's just blunt, overly honest, and not everyone likes her. Looking back, I should have been alarmed by the fact that he put other women down just to make her look better. But back then, it all felt insignificant compared to being with him. In every other way, he seemed perfect. Smart, funny, charming. Exactly the kind of man I had always dreamed of. I was willing to tolerate Fiona because I loved him, and he constantly reassured me that he loved me too. Over time, I learned to ignore her comments and stop letting her get under my skin. When Fiona got a boyfriend, things improved even more. About 4 years ago, she met Eddie through a dating app, and within a year, they were engaged. She completely lost her head over him, and it seemed like he was just as in love with her. Still, I felt like 1 year wasn't enough time to truly know someone or rush into marriage. They hadn't even lived together that long. But Fiona and I weren't close, and I knew that if I said anything, she'd explode. So, I kept quiet. I told my husband my concerns, hoping he'd gently guide her toward a more reasonable decision. Instead, he was thrilled that he and Fiona got engaged around the same time and even talked about having a joint wedding. I shut that down immediately, saying our views on everything were completely different. Thankfully, she didn't push it. She married Eddie about a month after our wedding. Everything was fine until recently. 5 months ago, Fiona told my husband she couldn't get pregnant. She and Eddie had been trying for almost half a year and decided to get checked, and fortunately, it turned out Fiona was infertile. From that moment on, their marriage began to fall apart. They tried couples counseling, but it didn't help because Eddie eventually filed for divorce. He said he didn't want to stay in a childless marriage. It was a cruel move on his part. Honestly, I felt sorry for Fiona. She started coming over to our place far more often than before. I tolerated it because I knew she was going through a terrible time, and my husband seemed to be her only real support. Every visit ended in tears, and my husband would comfort her. It was hard to be angry at someone already suffering so much. I knew she truly loved Eddie. Then came the divorce proceedings and property negotiations, which pushed her even deeper into despair. That's when my husband asked if she could stay with us for a while, saying that being around him made her feel normal again. That was almost 2 weeks ago, and the moment I let her into my home, I regretted it. She criticized everything. The food, the house, my habits, my TV shows. Everything was excused because she was depressed. According to my husband, we needed to accommodate her. I repeatedly said I wanted Fiona to leave. If she hated everything so much, she could go back to her parents. but my husband begged me to let her stay, saying he was afraid she might hurt herself if we kicked her out. I stayed silent because I didn't want that guilt on my conscience. But 2 days ago, I kicked them both out. When I came home from work, I saw that my husband had moved some of his belongings into the guest room where Fiona was staying. He had come home early just to organize it. They were still moving his things when I walked in. I was in shock and asked to speak to my husband privately, but he said we could talk in front of Fiona. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely happy. I asked why he was moving rooms, and he calmly said he would now be sleeping in the same room as Fiona. He explained that she had been having panic attacks and needed someone there at night to comfort her. I told him that was absolutely not happening, but he used his favorite excuse again, that Fiona was like a sister to him and I had nothing to worry about. They both stood there smiling, as if that made everything normal. I smiled back and said I understood. While they continued setting up the room, I went to our bedroom and grabbed the house documents. My father had gifted me this house, and it's legally in my name only. I went back and politely asked if they were done unpacking. When they said yes, I told them it was time to pack again, because this was my house and I would no longer tolerate being disrespected in my own home. My husband thought I was joking until he realized I wasn't. I told him I was disgusted by him, and even more by Fiona. They accused me of being jealous and insecure. I didn't deny it, but the problem wasn't me. It was their twisted relationship. Eventually, they left. After that, I was bombarded with messages from friends and family, all saying I was overreacting and being cruel. I immediately knew he had influenced them. Every message sounded the same. I blocked everyone and decided to file for divorce. Then he contacted me again, saying he'd come back if I apologized. Once again, he said Fiona was like a sister to him. I doubted myself for a while, but eventually realized I hadn't crossed the line. I filed for divorce. The comments opened my eyes. I realized I had lived through years of manipulation and gaslighting. I submitted the paperwork. He didn't contest it, but tried to guilt trip me. I gave him one condition: no more Fiona. He refused. That told me everything. Much later, he admitted I had been right and that Fiona wanted more. But by then, it was too late. We're still divorcing, and despite everything, I believe I made the right choice. She completely lost her head over him, and it seemed like he was just as in love with her. Still, I felt like 1 year wasn't enough time to truly know someone or rush into marriage. They hadn't even lived together that long, but Fiona and I weren't close, and I knew that if I said anything, she'd explode. So, I kept quiet. I told my husband my concerns, hoping he'd gently guide her toward a more reasonable decision. Instead, he was thrilled that he and Fiona got engaged around the same time and even talked about having a joint wedding. I shut that down immediately, saying our views on everything were completely different. Thankfully, she didn't push it. She married Eddie about a month after our wedding. Everything was fine until recently. 5 months ago, Fiona told my husband she couldn't get pregnant. She and Eddie had been trying for almost half a year and decided to get checked, and fortunately, it turned out Fiona was infertile. From that moment on, their marriage began to fall apart. They tried couples counseling, but it didn't help because Eddie eventually filed for divorce. He said he didn't want to stay in a childless marriage. It was a cruel move on his part.